Gloria Tate, a worn-out nurse after a brutal shift, stands outside the pharmacy. All she wants, her meds, home, and rest. She calmly hands over her ID, insurance, and prescription. All correct. The clerk grows tense, then quietly calls the manager. The manager comes cold and judgmental. "There's an issue. We've called the police," she says like it's nothing. Police cuff Gloria's hands behind her back as the pharmacy fills with staring eyes. Shocked customers watch, some filming, while Gloria stands silent. Gloria is dragged to the police station, hands tightly cuffed behind her back, humiliated, treated like a criminal. Gloria can only surrender, silent, head held high, humiliated for the color of her skin. Racism holds tight, but her spirit remains unbroke. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Part 1. Just another night. It was supposed to be just another ordinary night. Gloria Tate, a nurse who had spent more than 30 years stitching up broken bodies and easing restless souls, was finally clocking out after a brutal double shift. Her feet ached, her back screamed from hours of nonstop rounds, but all she could focus on was one simple thing: refilling her prescription before heading home to collapse into bed. The Georgia air was still thick, heavy with heat and humidity, clinging to the skin like a second layer, even though the sun had set hours ago. The kind of night where even the breeze felt tired. The local pharmacy sat quietly at the corner of a small suburban strip mall, its windows glowing with a sickly yellow light that spilled out into the otherwise empty parking lot. Gloria pulled her aging sedan into a space beneath the only working streetlight, a flickering bulb casting unsteady shadows across the pavement. She grabbed her purse, exhaled the weight of the day, and stepped out. She moved the way nurses often do after long shifts, steady, careful, carrying a quiet grace, the kind born not from pride, but from dignity, an earned calm, even when the body begs to rest. Inside the pharmacy, the place was nearly empty. A teenage clerk slouched behind the counter, yawning, his attention lost somewhere in the glow of his phone screen. When Gloria approached, she offered him a polite smile, handing over her ID, her insurance card, and the small paper slip for her blood pressure medication. Routine, familiar. She had picked up this prescription here many times before. The kid barely looked at her, scanning the documents with the disinterest of someone wishing they were anywhere else. His fingers tapped lazily at the register. Seconds stretched too long. Gloria shifted her weight from foot to foot, the ache in her legs deepening. Then she noticed the frown on the clerk's face as he stared at the computer screen, squinting. He leaned toward the manager, a white woman in her 40s with a pinched, sour expression, the kind of face that always seemed to be smelling something bad. The woman gave Gloria a brief glance, then another, sharper this time. Her lips pressed thin. She tapped a few keys on the computer herself, whispering something to the clerk. The air changed, subtle at first, but Gloria felt it immediately, the shift, the weight pressing down, invisible but unmistakable. Every black person knows that feeling, the moment suspicion enters the room before a single word has been spoken. Finally, the manager approached the counter. Her smile was tight, too sweet. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, voice dripping with forced politeness, "but there seems to be an issue with your prescription." Gloria raised her eyebrows, calm but confused. "I've been filling this same medication here for years. What issue?" The manager's hands fidgeted. "The account details. They aren't matching up. I'm afraid we can't process this tonight." Gloria leaned in slightly. Her voice stayed level. "That doesn't make sense. You have my ID. You have my insurance. Everything matches. Check again." But the woman was already backing away, stiffening. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait here, ma'am. We've contacted the authorities to investigate." For a moment, Gloria thought she must have misheard. "Authorities?" she repeated, dangerously calm. The clerk behind the counter suddenly couldn't meet her eyes. The manager's chin lifted, her posture hardening in that way people do when they've already decided you're guilty. Gloria took a slow, steady breath. Years of emergency rooms had trained her to stay calm when the walls closed in. But this wasn't a medical emergency. This was older, colder, uglier. This was what it felt like to be judged not by your actions, but by the color of your skin. Outside, somewhere in the warm, heavy night, sirens began to wail. Gloria stood her ground. She could have walked out, could have grabbed her paperwork and left. But she knew how that would look. Like guilt. She had done nothing wrong. So she stood. And she waited. Part 2. Presumed Guilty. The door chimed sharply as 2 police officers stepped inside, both white, both carrying that same air of practiced authority, the kind that says they expect the room to adjust around them, not the other way around. The first officer was tall, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and a permanent smirk etched into the corner of his mouth. The second was younger, thinner, hanging back just enough to show he wasn't entirely sure if he was supposed to enjoy what was about to happen. Gloria caught their eyes as they gave her that familiar glance. Not curiosity, not inquiry, assumption. The manager wasted no time. She hurried toward them, her voice dropping into a frantic, almost reverent whisper. "That's her," she hissed. "She tried to pick up medication fraudulently. The account details don't match. I think she's using someone else's insurance." The tall officer didn't even glance at the computer screen. He didn't ask for paperwork, didn't ask questions. His shoulders squared as he stepped toward Gloria, like a predator circling easy prey. "Ma'am," he said, his tone oozing condescension, "I'm going to need you to step outside with us." Gloria stood her ground, head high. "I haven't done anything wrong," she replied, her voice steady. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking toward his partner, but saying nothing. The manager folded her arms across her chest, watching the scene unfold with a glimmer of satisfaction. The tall officer's hand moved deliberately toward the baton on his belt. "We can do this the easy way," he said, lowering his voice, "or the hard way." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat. Around the pharmacy, the atmosphere began to shift. Other customers were starting to notice. A mother grabbed her child's hand and hurried toward the exit. A man near the cold medicine aisle raised his phone and hit record. Gloria noticed the phone out of the corner of her eye. Good, she thought. Let them record. Let the world see. But still, rage tightened in her chest. Humiliation coiled like a fist beneath her ribs. After everything she had given, the lives she had helped save, the nights spent working through exhaustion, this was how they saw her. Not as a healer, not as a woman who had done nothing but follow the rules, but as a suspect, a threat, a criminal. Gloria took a slow breath, forcing calm into her voice. "I have my ID. I have my insurance. I have my prescription. Everything is valid." She held out the documents toward the officer. He barely looked at them. "Step outside," he repeated. When she didn't move fast enough for his liking, the tall officer stepped forward, grabbing her wrist roughly and yanking her arm behind her back. The sharp snap of metal echoed through the pharmacy as the cold bite of the handcuffs closed around her wrists. Gasps rippled through the room. Gloria didn't fight. She knew better. Fighting would give them exactly the excuse they were hoping for. Instead, she let herself be led, head high, every muscle in her body burning with the effort of staying still. The cuffs cut into her skin as they marched her toward the door. She could feel the eyes on her, the customers watching, the clerk shrinking behind the counter, the manager still standing there, lips pressed thin in smug triumph. Gloria didn't lower her gaze, not to the customers, not to the manager, not to the officers. As they shoved her into the back seat of the squad car, the tall officer sneered down at her. But Gloria's eyes never flinched. She met his stare directly, her voice calm as steel. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." The door slammed shut behind her with a heavy, final thud. The heat of humiliation, the ache of the cuffs cutting into her wrists, it all settled deep into her bones. But somewhere beneath that pain, beneath the shame they tried to force onto her, something colder, stronger began to burn. Because they had no idea who they were dealing with. Not yet, but they would. Part 3. Silent Ride. Loud injustice. The ride to the police station was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't offer peace, but presses down on your chest, making the air heavier with every mile. Gloria sat stiffly in the back seat of the patrol car, her wrists pinched painfully by the metal cuffs, the cold steel biting into her skin, digging against bone. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She knew how this worked. Silence could be twisted into guilt. But it didn't matter. Nothing she said would change the decision they'd already made about her the moment they laid eyes on her. Up front, the officers talked to each other like she wasn't even there. Like she was cargo, not a human being. Just a problem to be processed, a piece of paperwork to be filed away before they grabbed their late-night coffee. Another fraud case, Officer Rick Coleman muttered with a chuckle as he steered the car lazily through the quiet streets of Savannah. What is it with these people, thinking they can just walk in and take whatever they want? His voice was low, but Gloria heard every word. Officer David Miller, riding shotgun, mumbled something in response. Quieter, less certain, but he didn't disagree. Gloria stared out the window, her jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. The blurred lights of the city streaked past, smearing into the darkness. Her whole body vibrated with the urge to scream, to fight, to demand that they see her. But she knew better. She had seen too many people who never made it out of that back seat. When the squad car pulled into the cracked, weed-lined parking lot of a rundown precinct, Coleman yanked the door open with an impatient flick of his hand. "Let's go," he snapped. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Gloria stepped out slowly, carefully, holding on to what little dignity they hadn't already tried to strip away. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the parking lot as other officers lingered nearby, pretending not to stare, but staring anyway. Inside, the station smelled like bleach and stale coffee. The walls were painted a sickly off-white, the floor scuffed and stained from years of footsteps and frustration. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting a harsh glare across the dingy booking area. They led her to the processing desk, like she was already guilty. Officer Miller fumbled with the keys as he removed the cuffs, while Coleman scribbled lazily on a form. Name: Gloria Tate. Age: 58. Race. Black Gloria stared down at the paperwork. That last box, she thought bitterly, was the only one they had really cared about tonight. Coleman shoved the form toward the desk sergeant, speaking loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Suspected prescription fraud, caught red-handed at the pharmacy. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set, balding man with jowls like a bulldog, barely looked up from his paperwork. One glance at Gloria, one shrug. Just another black woman, just another case number. Gloria stood still as they took her mugshot, the flash of the camera blinding, the snap of the shutter sounding like a door slamming shut. Then came the fingerprints, the officer rolling her sore fingers one by one against the ink pad. Rough, mechanical, careless. No one asked questions. No one looked twice. They didn't need to. In their eyes, the verdict was already written. When it was over, they marched her down the hall, the squeak of her shoes against the linoleum echoing down the long corridor. Gloria kept her head up, but every step felt heavier. Every word she overheard along the way cut deeper. What's she in for? Fraud, I think. Figures. Every comment stung, not because she believed them, but because she knew how easy it was for a lie to take root and grow into truth when no one wanted to know better. Finally, they shoved her into a holding cell. Bare walls, a cold metal bench bolted to the floor, and a door that clanged shut behind her with a sound that echoed like a verdict. Coleman leaned casually against the bars, smirking. "You want to tell us the real story now?" he asked, voice mocking. "Might go easier for you if you come clean." Gloria met his gaze without flinching. "The real story is that you're going to regret tonight," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Miller snorted from across the hall. "Yeah, sure. You got some magic lawyer hiding in your purse?" She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Coleman shrugged. "Suit yourself. You can sit here and think about it." With that, they turned and walked away, their boots thudding against the floor as they left her alone, with nothing but the buzz of the fluorescent lights, the stench of bleach, and the suffocating weight of their assumptions. Gloria sat still on the bench, her hands resting carefully in her lap. She refused to slouch, refused to look defeated. If they wanted to break her, they were going to have to try a hell of a lot harder than this. Part 4. The fire inside time moved differently inside the holding cell. Minutes dragged like hours beneath the harsh buzz of the overhead light, its flicker casting jerky shadows along the cold concrete walls. The metal bench beneath Gloria was unforgiving, but she sat upright, spine straight, chin lifted. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. Every few minutes, footsteps echoed down the hallway, sometimes the heavy stomp of a cop on patrol, sometimes the lazy shuffle of someone killing time. None of them stopped at her door. None of them even glanced her way. They didn't need to. In their minds, Gloria Tate had already been filed away, labeled, forgotten. Just another black woman. Just another problem. Gloria's wrists throbbed from where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin. She turned them slowly, studying the red welts they'd left behind. Marks that weren't just from tonight, but from everything this system was built to do when it thought no one would call it out. She shifted her weight, the hard bench beneath her digging into her bones. She was tired, bone-tired, but somewhere beneath the exhaustion, under the bruises and the humiliation, that steady flame still burned. They wanted to break her, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. The clock on the wall outside the cell ticked loudly. 9:42 p.m. It wouldn't be long now. Gloria knew her father well enough to know that. Walter Tate was not a man who wasted time, especially not when it came to protecting his daughter. And if anything, the injustice of tonight would only make him move faster. From down the hallway, voices began to rise, first low, then sharper, angrier. The sudden crack of a hand slapping against a desk echoed through the station. "What do you mean someone's calling from D.C. at this hour?" came Officer Coleman's voice, loud, defensive, rattled. There was a pause, then quieter but no less panicked. "Yeah? Well, tell them they can shove it." Gloria smiled faintly to herself. She knew that tone, the bravado of a man who just realized he was standing in quicksand but still believed he could bluff his way out. The phone rang again, this time longer, louder. A different officer picked up. His voice tightened immediately. "Yes, sir. She's here. Yes, sir. Right away." The shift in the station was sudden and unmistakable, the kind of silence that comes not from boredom, but from fear, from the knowledge that something much bigger was about to walk through the door. Gloria leaned back against the concrete wall and closed her eyes just for a moment. It had begun. They had no idea who they were messing with, not yet. But they were about to find out. Part 5. The name that shakes the room. The front door of the station slammed open with a force that made the entire building flinch. The silence that followed wasn't casual. It was sharp, tense. The kind of silence that falls when everyone suddenly remembers how small they are. Gloria didn't need to see him. She already knew who had just walked in. Walter Tate, her father. The man whose name still carried weight in the corridors of law enforcement, even years after his retirement from the FBI. The man who had spent decades pulling corrupt officers out of their safe little corners and shining a spotlight straight into their darkness. And now he was here for her. The murmur of voices at the front desk wasn't angry. It was worse. Calm. Too calm. The way people speak when they're standing at the edge of something dangerous and know it. A few quiet "yes, sir" replies floated back toward the holding cells. Footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. First to appear around the corner was Officer Miller. His face had gone pale, his mouth drawn tight into a nervous, bloodless line. He whispered something frantic to Coleman, who stood near the cell hallway, arms crossed too tightly, his jaw clenched. Coleman snapped back at him under his breath, but Gloria could see it, the crack spreading across his mask of confidence. The realization was beginning to settle into his bones. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how bad it was going to get. Two men in dark suits appeared next, earpieces tucked discreetly beneath their collars. Federal agents, Not local cops, not mall security, the real thing. And behind them, filling the hallway like a storm rolling in from the sea, came Walter Tate. He hadn't changed much, maybe a few more silver strands in his neatly cropped hair, a few deeper lines etched across his face, but his eyes were still sharp, his back still straight, and his presence, the quiet, crushing weight of it, filled the hallway. Walter didn't look at the officers. He looked straight at Gloria. When their eyes met, no words were needed. "I'm here. You're not alone." Walter turned his attention to Coleman, and the effect was immediate. Coleman straightened up like a soldier caught slouching by a general, his face flushing red, then pale. "Who's in charge here?" Walter's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading fast and wide. The desk sergeant fumbled forward, nearly tripping over himself. That would be me, sir." Walter nodded once, slow. "Good. Then you'll want to explain to me," he continued, his voice smooth but deadly, "why a licensed nurse with valid identification and no criminal record is sitting in a holding cell tonight." The sergeant opened his mouth, closed it again. Sweat gathered at his temples. Walter stepped closer, his tone never changing. "You'll also want to explain why your officers detained her without confirming the error, why they ignored clear evidence of her identity, why they chose to publicly humiliate her, physically restrain her, without probable cause." Another step forward. His eyes didn't blink. "And you'll want to explain it very carefully," Walter finished, "because as of 10 minutes ago, you're no longer just dealing with local fallout." The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Walter's gaze swept across the room like a searchlight. "You're dealing with a federal civil rights violation," he said softly, "and the Department of Justice is already on the line." The color drained from Coleman's face. His mouth opened, then snapped shut again. The two federal agents beside Walter exchanged a glance. One of them produced a keyring, already moving toward the holding cell. "Unlock the door," Walter ordered. Coleman finally found his voice, though it came out thin, strained, desperate. You can't just walk in here and—" Walter turned his head slowly toward him. The look he gave could have frozen fire. "I already have." The cell door swung open with a soft, metallic creak. Walter stepped forward, extending his hand toward Gloria. But she didn't take it. Not yet. Instead, she rose on her own, slowly, every movement measured, every muscle aching but refusing to bend. She stood on her own 2 feet, shoulders squared, head high. Only then did she give him a small nod. Walter smiled, just barely, and stepped aside, letting her walk out first. As she passed Coleman, Gloria didn't spare him so much as a glance, but she didn't need to. She could feel the tension in his clenched fists, see the way his throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, hear the quickened breath he was trying to steady. He knew. Finally, he knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And somewhere deep inside her chest, Gloria exhaled, for the first time that night, the slow, steady breath of a woman who knew the tide was turning. Part 6. The reckoning begins. As Gloria stepped out of the holding cell, the energy inside the police station shifted. The officers who had been standing casually only moments before now found urgent reasons to look away, down at their paperwork, at the floor, anywhere but at her. Conversations that had hummed lazily through the station died mid-sentence. Laughter evaporated into uneasy silence. The ones who had chuckled, the ones who had whispered. They were all suddenly very still. Walter walked one step behind Gloria, not crowding, not leading, just there, solid, unyielding, a wall at her back. The two federal agents flanked them, making it clear that this was not a favor. This was not a request. This was official. This was serious. This was justice, walking their hallways one deliberate step at a time. Gloria's wrists still ached from the bite of the handcuffs, red marks circling her skin like proof of the violence done to her. But she ignored the pain. She ignored the eyes that clung to her as she passed. She carried herself with the quiet power of someone who knew exactly what had been stolen from her, and who intended to take it back. At the front desk, the sergeant fumbled awkwardly with the edge of the counter, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Officer Miller stood nearby, shoulders hunched so tightly he looked like he might fold in on himself. His eyes kept darting toward the door, like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew was coming. Walter didn't even glance at them. His attention was fixed on the phone ringing sharply at the front desk, insistent, demanding. The sergeant froze, his hand hovering above the receiver as though afraid it might burn him. "Answer it," Walter said, calm as ever. The sergeant snatched up the phone, pressing it to his ear with trembling fingers. "Savannah PD," he croaked. Whatever voice was on the other end, it didn't take long, maybe 2 seconds. The sergeant's face turned a shade paler. His head began to bob rapidly in a series of frantic nods. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Slowly, like his arm weighed 100 pounds, he held the phone out toward Walter. It's for you." Walter took the receiver without haste, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This is Tate." There was a pause on the line. Then Walter smiled. Not a kind smile. Not the smile of a man offering peace. A cold, knowing smile. The smile of a man who had spent a lifetime dismantling lies and was about to do it again. "Good," he said into the phone. "Proceed." He hung up. No drama, no speech. Just handed the phone back to the stunned sergeant like it was nothing but a piece of borrowed office equipment. Gloria raised one eyebrow, leaning slightly toward her father. Her voice was low enough that only he could hear. "What did you just set in motion?" Walter's eyes stayed on the room, sharp and steady. He didn't answer right away. Then, tilting his head just slightly toward her, he said quietly, "Do you remember the civil rights unit I helped build before I retired?" Gloria nodded once. "They've been looking for a case." His eyes narrowed. "Looks like they just found it." Before Gloria could reply, the front doors of the station banged open again, but this time the rhythm was different. Not the slow, deliberate steps of a man in control. The hard, rapid clatter of people moving with purpose. Federal agents, more of them. At least 6, fanning out through the station with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed this moment 100 times. Some headed straight toward the offices. Others moved to the computer terminals, accessing files without asking permission. One of the agents stepped forward, dropping a thick folder onto the counter in front of the desk sergeant. The man's hands shook as he reached for it. "This station," the agent announced, voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "is now under immediate federal audit, pending civil rights violations." A sharp intake of breath moved through the station like a wave. Coleman, still standing near the back, took a half step forward, his face darkening with rage. "You can't do that," he barked, fists clenched at his sides. "This is a local matter." Walter turned toward him, amusement flickering across his face like lightning behind clouds. "You might want to read the fine print on your badge, officer," he replied softly. "Local authority doesn't override federal law." Coleman opened his mouth, ready to argue, but one of the federal agents stepped into his path, blocking him with a single look that offered no discussion. And the weight in the room shifted again. This time it wasn't heavy with dread. It was charged, electric. The sudden, breathless understanding that the system these officers had always counted on, their shield, their safety net, wasn't coming to save them. Not this time. Walter gave a small nod toward Gloria, motioning. Part 7. The Tide Turns. The air outside the station felt different. Cooler, sharper, almost clean. For the first time that night, Gloria could truly breathe. Walter walked beside her, steady as ever. Neither of them said a word at first. They didn't have to. The moment spoke loud enough on its own. Finally, Gloria exhaled, a slow, heavy breath she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said softly. Walter turned his head just enough to glance at her, a rare gentleness softening his stern features. "You don't ever have to thank me for protecting you," he replied. "That's my job, always has been." They walked side by side across the quiet parking lot toward Walter's car. Somewhere behind them, the station doors remained wide open, the light from inside spilling out uselessly into the night, as if trying too late to cover up the darkness within. Walter's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen, his eyes narrowing with grim satisfaction. "What is it?" Gloria asked. "Background checks," Walter answered, slipping the phone back into his jacket. "Turns out Coleman and Miller have a little history, excessive force complaints, racial profiling accusations, stuff their department tried to bury." He shook his head, the faintest trace of disgust curling his lip. "Not anymore." Gloria gave a quiet, humorless smile. "They really thought they could just make me disappear." Walter's face hardened. "They thought you were alone." He opened the passenger side door for her. She climbed in, the simple act of sitting freely, without handcuffs, without concrete walls pressing in around her, feeling almost surreal. But the fight wasn't over, not even close. As Walter started the engine and they pulled away from the station, Gloria looked back one last time at the building behind them. The lights were still on, but the old rules, the ones that said people like her just had to endure whatever was done to them, those were starting to flicker too. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, something was beginning to crack. Maybe this time, the truth wouldn't stay buried. Gloria turned her gaze forward as the station faded into the rearview mirror. She didn't know exactly what was coming next, but whatever it was, she was ready. Part 8. Cracks in the Fortress. Back inside the station, the air had shifted. It hung heavy now, thick and suffocating, as if the walls themselves knew that something had gone terribly wrong. The officers moved differently, stiff, hesitant. Some hovered awkwardly by the front desk, pretending to shuffle papers they weren't reading. Others stood frozen near the hallways, heads down, lips pressed tight. No one dared speak the truth out loud, but they all felt it. The fortress they had always relied on, the shield of silence, the brotherhood of "we protect our own," was cracking, and the cracks were spreading fast. Officer Coleman paced like a caged animal near the corner of the room, his boots thudding against the worn linoleum floor. Every few steps, his eyes would flick toward the exit, then back toward the phones that hadn't stopped ringing since Walter Tate walked out with his daughter. His face twisted between fury and fear, like he couldn't decide which one fit better. Miller sat slumped against the far wall, gnawing nervously at the edge of his thumbnail until it bled, staring down at the floor as if he might fall through it if he just wished hard enough. The clock on the wall ticked louder than should have been possible, each second dragging out, each minute stretching thin. Another phone rang, shrill and sharp. The desk sergeant snatched it up, barking out a few clipped words before slamming the receiver back down. His hand trembled slightly as he set it aside. Nobody asked what was said. They already knew. Out in the lobby, behind the glass doors, a small crowd had begun to gather. Some were just bystanders, people who had been at the pharmacy. Others were drawn by the rising buzz of something happening, their faces pressed against the windows, wide-eyed, talking to each other in urgent, hushed whispers. There were no protest signs yet, but it was coming. The storm was building. Coleman finally broke the silence, his voice cracking like a whip across the room. "This is getting blown way out of proportion," he snapped, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "She resisted. She made it complicated." No one responded. Even Miller didn't look up to back him, because deep down, they all knew the truth. Gloria hadn't resisted. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't fought. She had just stood there, tired, dignified, defiant, while they slapped handcuffs on her wrists and paraded her through a pharmacy like she was a criminal. And now, every second that passed, the evidence of that injustice was multiplying. Videos being shared, posts going viral, eyewitness accounts being collected. The story wasn't contained inside the walls of the station anymore. It was bleeding out, across the city, across the state, across the country. The buzz of another incoming call sliced through the tension. An officer nearby cursed under his breath. They were losing control of the narrative. And for the first time in a very long time, the Savannah PD could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The old playbook, the one they'd counted on to protect them, was useless now. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. And this time, they weren't going to look away. Part 9. The Evidence. They couldn't bury. The tension inside the station kept building, layer by heavy layer. Every phone call, every whisper, every passing minute was another crack in the armor they had always believed would protect them. Then the door opened again, not with the angry slam of Coleman's pacing, not with the deliberate weight of Walter Tate's entrance, but with the quiet, purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly what they were here to do. A federal agent, a woman, sharp-eyed and stone-faced, a black tablet tucked firmly beneath her arm. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. She moved straight toward the desk sergeant, her steps clipped and confident. "We need access to all body cam footage from tonight," she said, her tone low, but leaving no room for argument. "Every second, no edits, no gaps." The sergeant blinked, hesitated for just a beat too long. Her eyes narrowed. Now his fingers scrambled clumsily across the keyboard, typing fast, hitting the wrong keys twice before correcting himself. The login screen blinked back at him like an accusation. From across the room, Coleman's voice rose again, louder now, desperate. "You can't just seize our footage without a warrant." The agent didn't even look at him. "You waived that right the second you initiated an arrest without probable cause?" she replied coolly. "Congratulations." Behind her, another agent was already plugging a small external device into the station's main server, pulling up files faster than anyone could stop him. Miller made a choking noise deep in his throat but stayed seated, frozen in place. Coleman took a step forward, fists clenched, voice shaking between outrage and panic. "You don't know what you're dealing with here." Finally, the agent turned toward him, slow, deliberate. "Oh," she said softly, deadly, "we know exactly what we're dealing with." Her words hung there in the air, slicing through the tension like a blade. In the background, murmurs rippled through the remaining officers. Some were already texting under the desks, thumbs flying, desperate for instructions. For backup that wasn't coming. Because the usual safety net, the captains, the unions, the good old boys network, they were all going quiet. They could feel it too. This time, no one was circling the wagons. This time, they were on their own. The internal phones kept ringing, urgent now, more frequent. But no one rushed to answer. Across the room, the female agent connected her tablet to the feed and began scrolling through the body cam footage. The screen lit up with damning clarity. Gloria at the pharmacy, calm, composed, handing over her ID, offering her insurance card, explaining herself clearly. Not resisting, not aggressive, not wrong. Frame by frame, second by second, the footage played on. Each moment, another nail driven into the false narrative that Coleman and Miller had tried to build. There was no fight, no fraud, no cause. Only the smug, sneering face of Coleman, shoving the cuffs onto her wrists. Only the smirk of the manager, nodding in satisfaction as Gloria was marched out like a thief. No interpretation needed. No creative report could spin this away. The truth was right there, for everyone to see. The agent paused the video, tapped the screen, and turned the tablet to face the room. "This," she said simply, "this is what happens when you think no one's watching." Silence. Gloria's voice echoed softly from the recording, captured perfectly by the body cam microphone. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." The agent gave a thin smile. "Turns out," she added, "she was right." Outside the station, the crowd was growing, more people gathering, more cameras flashing against the glass. Reporters had begun to arrive, pressing microphones against the doors. Protesters held handwritten signs. Chants started to rise, muffled but clear. The outside world wasn't just watching, it was knocking at the door. And for the first time, the officers inside realized they might not be able to keep it out. Part 10. Power Shift. The hum of the station had changed. The officers weren't just nervous now, they were cornered. The sergeant at the desk tried to keep his focus on the paperwork in front of him, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes kept drifting toward the door, like he expected someone, anyone, to barge in and rescue them from the mess they had created. The younger officers, the ones who had watched Gloria's arrest with smirks and folded arms, now stood stiff against the walls, their mouths pressed shut, their laughter gone. One leaned against the filing cabinet, arms crossed too tightly across his chest, his knuckles white. Coleman was pacing again, back and forth like a caged beast. His boots thudded harder now, each step more frantic than the last. Every few passes, his eyes darted toward the internal phones, still ringing, still ignored. His voice cracked the silence. "This is ridiculous. We followed protocol. She didn't comply." No one answered him, not even Miller, who now sat with his head down, face buried in his hands, rocking slightly like a man trying to disappear into himself. Another phone rang. The sergeant picked it up, snapped out a few sharp words, then hung up with enough force to rattle the receiver. His shoulders sagged. Nobody asked what the call was about, because they knew. The crowd outside had nearly doubled. Protest signs were pressed against the glass. Cameras flashed. Microphones stood ready. The outside world was here, fully awake, fully watching. And inside the station? It was dead quiet, until the door swung open again. But this time, it wasn't just another agent or another call. This time the air in the room snapped so tight you could almost hear it crack. Walter Tate walked back in. And he wasn't alone. Flanking him were two high-ranking officials from the Department of Justice, badges visible, their faces carved from stone. Behind them, two more federal agents followed, carrying heavy black cases. Cases that meant business. Cases that meant no more games. Every officer in the room froze. Some stood instinctively, old habits forcing them upright like soldiers at attention. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, watching the walls close in. Walter didn't rush. He didn't bark orders. He didn't need to. He stood still in the center of the room, his presence filling the space, his voice carrying effortlessly through the suffocating silence. "My name is Walter Tate," he began, though half the room already knew. "Retired Special Agent in Charge, FBI, current consultant to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." He let the words settle, let the weight of them drop hard. "And as of 30 minutes ago," he continued, his voice calm but razor-sharp, "this police station is officially under federal review for multiple violations of constitutional and civil rights." Miller made a soft, strangled sound, a cross between a gasp and a whimper. Coleman shifted on his feet, the last threads of his bravado slipping like a cheap suit in the rain. His arms crossed too tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched beneath his skin. Walter turned slowly, making deliberate eye contact with every officer in the room. No shouting, no anger, just certainty. A calm, devastating certainty. "We're here," he said, "to make sure justice isn't just a word painted on the wall." One of the DOJ officials stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and holding them up. "Effective immediately," the official announced, voice clear and formal. "Officers Rick Coleman and David Miller are suspended pending investigation into civil rights violations, wrongful arrest, and misconduct." The words hit like hammer blows. Coleman's mouth dropped open, ready to protest, but Walter silenced him with a single raised hand. "Save it," Walter said flatly. "You'll get your chance to talk, under oath." Another federal agent stepped forward, holding out two sealed envelopes, official notices of suspension. The sergeant took them with shaking hands, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. The agents moved toward Coleman and Miller, their arms outstretched. Badges and weapons, now! For a long moment it looked like Coleman might refuse. His chest heaved, his fists clenched and unclenched, his eyes burned with fury, but there was nowhere left to run. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached up and unpinned his badge, slamming it down on the desk so hard the metal rattled against the wood. His gun followed, placed down with a harsh metallic clatter. Miller moved slower, like a man walking to his own execution. His hands trembled as he unfastened his badge and set it down gently, like the weight of it still meant something. Walter stood motionless, watching, not angry, not triumphant, focused. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. And this was just the beginning. Part 11. Collapse of the Shield. The weight inside the room didn't lift after Coleman and Miller gave up their badges. It got heavier, thicker, like the air itself understood the shift in power. The remaining officers stood frozen, unsure whether to move, to speak, or even to breathe. Some stared at the floor. Some stole nervous glances toward the federal agents, their eyes wide and unsure. The bravado that had filled the room hours earlier was gone now, evaporated like smoke. Walter's eyes scanned the station, sharp, methodical. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice low but carrying like a hammer striking steel. "There will be depositions. There will be grand jury hearings. And if the evidence supports it—" He paused there, letting the moment hang, letting the weight of the words settle on every chest. "There will be federal charges." At the back of the station, someone cursed under their breath. No one corrected him. No one dared. Outside, the noise of the crowd had swelled, louder, angrier, but also hopeful. Reporters were jockeying for position now. Protesters lifted their signs higher. The chant of "Justice for Gloria" was rising like a drumbeat, steady and undeniable. The sound pushed against the walls of the station, as if the truth itself was demanding to be let in. Walter turned his attention back to the sergeant at the front desk. "You will cooperate fully with this investigation," he said. "You will turn over every piece of footage, every report, every disciplinary record. No redactions, no disappearing paperwork." The sergeant nodded stiffly, his lips pressed tight, eyes refusing to rise above the desk. Walter studied him for a moment, then gave the smallest shake of his head. "You might want to call a lawyer," he added softly. "You're going to need one." Then he turned on his heel and walked toward the exit, the federal agents falling into step behind him, the case files in their hands like loaded weapons. Outside the station, as Walter and the DOJ team stepped through the doors, the crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed like strobe lights in the night. But it wasn't Walter they focused on. It was Gloria. She stepped forward, tall, unflinching, her presence as steady and commanding as the men in suits around her. No tears, no trembling, just the strength of a woman who had refused to bow her head. The crowd parted as she walked, strangers reaching out, not to grab, not to pull, but simply to touch her shoulder, to let her know they were there. Walter stood just behind her, silent, solid, the sentry at her back. He didn't wave to the cameras. He didn't speak to the press. This wasn't about the cameras. It was about what came next. Tonight was only the first crack, but the walls were already starting to fall. And there wasn't a single thing they could do to stop it. Part 12. The story breaks wide open. The sun had barely risen the next morning when the first headlines hit. Local nurse wrongfully arrested, federal investigation underway. By noon, it wasn't just local news anymore. It was everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News. Gloria's face, captured mid-frame, standing tall with cuffs biting into her wrists, eyes steady, flashed across television screens and social media feeds. Her story was being retold in clips, in shares, in hashtags. But the headlines didn't just say Gloria Tate. They said, "Daughter of retired FBI agent." The story exploded because it wasn't just about one woman. It was about the system. The same system too many had trusted to do the right thing and had been betrayed by time and time again. This time, someone had forced the rot into the light. Inside a commandeered conference room just blocks away from the Savannah PD, the Department of Justice had set up a temporary operations center. The place buzzed with agents working in shifts, combing through files, cross-referencing incident reports, subpoenaing emails, and pulling up body cam footage that suddenly looked very different under federal scrutiny. Gloria sat quietly near the corner of the room, watching it all unfold. Walter was there too, standing close to the lead investigators, conferring in low, focused conversations. Every so often, he glanced back at his daughter, checking in with just a look. "Are you holding up?" And Gloria would answer with the smallest nod. Yes, she was tired, bone deep, tired, but she wasn't backing down. The investigators weren't just looking at her case anymore. They were digging deeper, pulling at threads the department had hoped would stay buried. 15 excessive force complaints, 7 allegations of racial profiling, 3 internal affairs investigations that had been quietly closed with no action taken. None of them properly addressed. All swept under the rug. Emails surfaced, messages between supervisors joking about keeping the streets clean the old-fashioned way and laughing about shaking down troublemakers. Texts between Coleman and Miller bragging about rough arrests, about making examples out of people who got mouthy. Screenshots of tampered evidence logs, chain of custody violations, body cam footage that had mysteriously gone missing, but it wasn't missing now. Someone inside the system, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of anger, had saved backup copies. And now, every ugly, damning second was playing out on monitors across the DOJ's war room. One clip in particular made Gloria's stomach twist. A black teenager, no older than 16, pinned face first against the hood of a patrol car, sobbing, while Coleman barked insults at him. No crime, no resistance, just rage, just abuse. Another clip. Miller laughing as he shoved a Latina woman into the back of a squad car, her only offense asking why she'd been stopped for a broken taillight. She hadn't even been given a ticket. Each video stripped away whatever defense the department might have thought they could build. There would be no spinning this. There would be no rewriting this truth. Walter stood in the middle of it all, arms folded tightly across his chest, jaw clenched. His eyes weren't triumphant. They were furious, controlled, focused. The fury of a man who had seen too much of this for too long. Special Agent Ramirez, leading the DOJ team, finally turned toward Gloria. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the hammer she was about to swing. "We have enough to recommend criminal charges," Ramirez said, "not just internal misconduct, not just civil suits." She ticked the charges off on her fingers like a checklist: obstruction of justice, falsifying police reports, tampering with evidence, deprivation of rights under color of law. Ramirez paused, then looked Gloria directly in the eye. "And that's just the beginning." Walter gave one small, grim nod. "Good." Gloria didn't speak. She didn't need to. She absorbed the words, let the weight of them settle into her bones. Because this wasn't just about her. It never had been. It was about the boy pinned against the patrol car. The woman thrown into the squad car for daring to ask a question. The countless others who would never get their names in the headlines. The ones who didn't have someone like Walter Tate waiting in the wings. Outside the operations center, news vans lined the street. Protesters held their signs higher. Reporters shouted questions at any officer who walked by. The city wasn't just awake, it was watching. And this time, it wasn't going to look away.